Sipes, and I have our devotional for this week. And I wanted to talk primarily about two things. One, Pastor Keith asked me to give an update on Hurricane Laura response in Texas and Louisiana, though primarily it'll be about Louisiana. But I also wanted to take the time to talk a little bit about how we as Christians can best support those who are in the midst of suffering, those who are struggling, who are grieving. It ends up being a lot of my work when I go to these areas. I'm consistently with people who are experiencing really big hardships, really big struggles, particularly from natural disasters or refugee displacement crisis, all sorts of things where our church is responding. But you meet people who are really in the midst of a terrible struggle. And so what does it look like to respond well in that situation? And just very briefly, I wanted to share from Matthew chapter 2 and then describe why I'm sharing these verses. In Matthew chapter 2, this is where the wise men have arrived, and they're with Joseph and Mary and Jesus. But Herod has heard about this going on. He wants to find Jesus because he's threatened. He thinks Jesus is going to overtake him. And so, he starts asking, to find Jesus. Well, Joseph and Mary and Jesus escape to Egypt, and obviously Herod gets furious about this. And so this is Herod's response when he finds out that they have fled to Egypt. It says, when Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled, quote, "A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more." The reason I wanted to share that is that line, refusing to be comforted. I think a lot of times when we come across someone who's grieving or suffering or struggling, we instantly want to fix things, right? We want to make them feel better. We want to make them happy. But often either people refuse to be comforted because they need and want to sit in that grief and process it and deal with it, or they're struggling so much they can't even really grasp on to what you're trying to do. And so I'll give an example. Last year during the Memorial Day tornadoes that were here in Dayton and kind of all the way up the west side of the state, I stopped at a house in Salina, and there was a man outside of this almost completely destroyed house. The first floor, was kind of there. The second floor was basically blown apart. And I started talking to this guy, and I said, "Is this your house?" And he said, No, it's my dad's house. You can see him up there in the roof, or on what was the second floor. And you could kind of look in, and there was part of a wall there, and you could see him walking back and forth. He's kind of picking stuff up. And I assumed he was cleaning up, cleaning debris, or maybe finding, items that he cherished. And I said, "Oh, so he's cleaning out the place?" And the son said, "No, he's been up there for about 6 hours, and he just keeps picking up one piece of drywall and moving it over to one side of the room, and then picking it up again and moving it back, and he's been doing it all day." And so clearly, this father, who was, I think, in his 70s, was traumatized, by what had happened. Maybe this was a family home for a long time. Regardless, like the pain of losing everything in a moment like that so unexpectedly. And so if we show up in those moments and we're like, you know what, God has a plan for you, and we're just going to rejoice along with you that God is going to make something great out of this. Sometimes people don't want to hear it, and sometimes people can't hear it. Instead, our posture should really be the posture that is described about Jesus in 2 Philippians, where we take the mindset of the place that we're in. Paul says in Romans, rejoice with those who are rejoicing and suffer with those who are suffering. And so we come in and we stand alongside those who are suffering, and we sit in their suffering and say, you know what, I'm just going to be here with you. I'm not going to try to move you out of this. I just want you to know you won't be alone in this, right? And so we would never consider, if someone was rejoicing, we would never consider coming along and making them grieve, right? Like encouraging them to be sorrowful or grief-stricken. That would never cross our imagination. And yet we often do that with people who are grieving or suffering. We try to rejoice them out of their pain. And it not only does it usually not work, it is healthy for us to process that grief, to process pain, to deal with trauma in a way that actually lets us confront it instead of running past or trying to avoid it or theologizing our way out of our pain. It just doesn't work that way. So I would encourage you. I mean, I think that our church, for the most part, is really good at this, that we serve in our community and we don't seek to fix every problem. We just want people to know that we care and we are with them. And that should be our posture all the time. We care. We are with you. If you are suffering, I will suffer with you. Show me what it looks like to be with you during this time. So there are many in Louisiana and Texas as well to a lesser extent, but in Louisiana in particular that are suffering because of Hurricane Laura. Hurricane Laura landed a little over a week ago, about a week and a half ago, as a Category 4 in a place called Cameron, Louisiana, which is a very, it's a smaller area. It's right on the coast, and it's relatively low population, dispersed, kind of distant, remote, low income area. And it was very heavily damaged. And the storm was so strong that instead of weakening right away, it kept hurricane status really far north into Louisiana. So there's a whole line of damage going up the western side of Louisiana and then north and east into the Mid-South region. We have several, 5 or 6 churches that were pretty heavily damaged. One that they say is essentially all but destroyed. Another one, the Lake Charles Church, Lake Charles First Church, every single bit of ceiling and drywall has to come out. It took on a lot of water the day after the hurricane before they were able to get it tarped. We have congregation members' homes that are damaged and some destroyed. And so since that time, we have had people sending crisis care kits in and other hygiene and food supplies. Water has been coming in. We've had partners like Convoy of Hope and Operation Blessing and World Hope and others that are working in the area that have partnered with us, and they're offering, again, food and water and supplies for rebuilding. We have Nazarene disaster response teams that have been coming from out of state to do work on the churches, and the pastor in Lake Charles, his home also was damaged and needed tarped. And so they've been tarping roofs and cleaning debris out of the properties and chainsaw work and, as I said, ripping out the insides of these churches that are really damaged. And they're all doing it because they are Nazarenes. Some of them have been through this on their own. They were affected by a hurricane and they want to come and serve. One particular story I want to tell is of a pair of brothers, and they live in a little community just outside Lake Charles. It's called Sulphur, Louisiana, and they thankfully evacuated, but they live in a mobile home out there, and it was pretty heavily damaged. The siding was torn completely off one side of it. The roof was completely damaged, and they both have some medical issues and some mobility issues, and at least one, if not both of them, are in a wheelchair. And so they had a wheelchair ramp leading up to their porch, but that was completely destroyed. And so the day I was out there and taking a video of this place so that I could send to a team to do the work, by the next day we had a team coming in from South Texas to work on these brothers' home. And the work that they did in one day, completely retarped the roof, put plywood on the one side of the house where the siding had been ripped off. They completely removed every bit of debris and cut, all the trees up, and completely rebuilt the wheelchair ramp and porch to this mobile home. Just crazy amount of work in one day. And it's simply because they are the kind of people who know when folks are suffering, you come alongside and you do what you can do. So I'm grateful for them, grateful for our church and everything that we do. As you think about how you can support people in Louisiana, and maybe elsewhere during this hurricane season, since we're just now hitting the peak of it, be thinking about ways to pray for them, be thinking about ways to support financially, be thinking about if it's in the cards for you to travel with a team and do some work after a storm. Let me know, let Pastor know, and we'd be happy to get you connected to the right people. But grateful for you guys, grateful for this church. Thanks.